Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Franklin Smith. I'm Executive Director of AAC, and I'm pleased to be with you this evening, moderating this webinar. Tonight's webinar is entitled Learn AAC AAC Resources in 4 Languages. Before we get started, I want to first of all start by welcoming everyone and wishing everyone, wherever you are in the world, wishing that you're all healthy and safe and abiding by whatever health, safety, travel regulations are currently in place in your country. These are certainly difficult times that we're living through, but we will get through, and AAC is certainly committed as an organization to doing whatever we can on behalf of the field of AAC to help provide opportunities like this to be able to get together virtually and learn together. So probably I'm hoping that a lot of you out there are familiar with AAC and the organization and what it is that we do on behalf of the field of AAC, but our vision and mission are currently up on the screen, and of course AAC's goals are exactly as I just outlined them, to do what we can to create worldwide awareness about the field of AAC and how it can help individuals with complex communication needs. And we do that, of course, through a variety of different ways, not the least of which is our scientific journal and our biennial conferences, and I'll be speaking about a little bit more after the session tonight. And of course, providing webinar opportunities like this as well. So we are absolutely thrilled this evening. I know I'm thrilled, and from the registration out there, it looks like everyone else is joining me. We are thrilled to have with us our good friends from AssistiveWare, and AssistiveWare has been hugely supportive of AAC for quite a few years now, and I want to, of course, give a big shout out to the whole AssistiveWare team and thank them for their tremendous support. And we are privileged this evening to have with us Amanda Hartman. Amanda is a speech-language pathologist with over 20 years experience working in schools and with families and as a technology consultant. All this has led to a passion for working with children and young adults with disabilities and learning difficulties. She currently splits her time between a busy private practice as an AAC consultant in schools and with AssistiveWare. She is also the lecturer for Augmentative and Alternative Communication at the University of Queensland and regularly presents workshops and at conferences to share what she knows about AAC and literacy. So without further ado, I am going to hand over control to Amanda. And Amanda, please go away.
Hi everyone, and thank you for that start and looking at things. So I'm just checking, Franklin, I'm sharing my screen already, or do I have to? I can't remember. I wasn't supposed to push a button. You're going to see my screen. We just had this meeting about that. That's a very bad start to my workshop. I'm so sorry.
No problem. I pushed the button.
Where's the button?
I think it's waiting for you to confirm acceptance.
Okay. Where's the button? Okay. I knew that this is why we practice these things before we start. So you guys can hear me all right, and I'm trying to see I'm really not seeing anything. Didn't pop up this time to share my screen. So just 1 second. I'm very sorry, everybody. Audio. Technical difficulties. So you're not currently seeing my screen?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. All right. Very sorry. Because we did have a little issue last time we did it, and I thought that I had it sorted out. So thank you everybody for your patience while I it's actually okay. I'm trying to have a look and see. Could you try connecting me again, because I definitely didn't get anything and somebody else's name just popped up, Sarah. Just
bear with us
very
1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about this. Okay, so I have just taken back control of the screen. So hopefully everyone sees my screen. And now let's try this one more time.
Thank you.
No problem. Assuming it allows me to do it. So it is, unfortunately, the system's not allowing me. So Amanda, what I'm going to suggest is perhaps log off and then log back in again. This will only be about a 1 minute delay, everyone. My apologies.
Okay. Sure, no problem. So I'll come back in.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, everyone. This will be no more than a 1 minute wait. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back in.
Thank you, Amanda.
Show my screen. I think I got it this time.
There we go. Woohoo!
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your
patience. Take it away, Amanda.
Thanks so much to Isaac and Franklin for inviting me to come along and talk to you about a little project that's very near and dear to my heart. So Franklin did an introduction of myself. The only thing I want to say is recently my boss asked me if I wanted to be called a senior speech pathologist, which I laughed. I thought made me just sound old. But anyway, I guess it does reflect that over 20 years in working in the area of AAC as a speech pathologist. So yes, I am a senior speech pathologist, I might take it, but I fear it makes me sound old. So what I'm hoping to get through in our webinar today is to get you guys to see some of the materials that are available on the AssistiveWare website. And I guess that comes from a place, selfishly, we want you to know what great stuff we've put together out there for starters, but we also think that this is a really nice learning opportunity for you to see how we went through the process and also made it into four languages, but also I think that it's really important that we learn from some of the research, the insights that we did. that can really change and challenge our thoughts about AAC practices. And I guess that's probably the bigger message that I want to make sure we come away with from today. So if we think about AAC resources from around the world, we know that AAC looks different in English versus non-English speaking countries. We just know that there are differences. And even if we just analyze all of the English resources, we know there's so much good stuff. Probably the biggest thing that we would all reflect as people working in the field of AAC is that resources seem to be scattered. There's good stuff, but it's kind of in all sorts of places. And trying to come up with that one-stop shop where we can find everything that we need is sometimes a challenge when we're trying to find the right information for us, perhaps for our own professional learning or to support a team or a family. Trying to find something can be sometimes tricky. And then if we look at other languages, so anything non-English languages about AAC, there's often very limited materials, and some of it actually comes from a place that's a little bit out of date, reflects some of that out of date practice that, you know, that they're still catching up with the latest research in their countries. They may not have website, they're still using books there. Yeah, so information comes from resellers rather than from so resellers of products rather than from industry professionals. So it's a kind of a bit of a mix of things. And anybody that supports AAC in languages other than English, I would love you to chime in and add anything. Franklin didn't mention at the beginning, but we are going to be allowing some time at the end for questions, and you can add your questions into the question field as we go along, and we'll have a chance to look at those together at the end. But the big question that we know needs answered is that how do we get solid AAC languages in solid AAC knowledge, sorry, but in different languages? We know that as an AAC community, we need this knowledge, and we need it in easy to read, easy to find format. And we also at AssistiveWare made that really reflective practice that we wanted that solid AAC knowledge to be there regardless of what AAC tool or system. So it's very agnostic. Our materials. Obviously, AssistiveWare, we have, you know, we have a bank of communication AAC apps that we develop: Proloquo to Go, Proloquo for Text, and Simpod. However, we as a community, as an organisation, just recognised the need as an AAC community for solid knowledge. So we started this little project looking at, I guess, first of all, we started off with symbol-based resources. So we knew that there's already lots of research, lots of sources about how we can support someone who might use symbols in the AAC. And so we wrote a whole lot of articles that, again, were based on the latest evidence-based best practice concepts. And we really tried to make the articles not written for any one person or audience. We wanted them to be equally accessible for parents as for therapists or any support teams that were working with someone who might use symbols. And so we came up with a whole lot of stuff that allowed us, you know, we're trying to do things, sometimes they're just an article, but we are trying to make sure that we include quotes and references and illustrations. We've recently started adding fact sheets and posters, just to make an article more interesting and more shareable, in fact. So we're going to click over to the website now and have a look at that. But before I do that, I just want to point out that after we wrote all of the articles in English on AAC, and for the symbol-based section, we actually had them translated into Spanish, Dutch, and French. And then they were checked by an AAC professional in that language. So we had quite a lot of people that collaborated. AssistiveWare is and always will be a team. And so basically we were able to put together, for the first time, in fact, in some of these countries, some really solid AAC information in Spanish, Dutch, and French. And we chose those languages because those are the additional languages other than English that are supported in Proloquo to Go. So we have a community that we're building in those areas, and we wanted to make sure that we could support them. So this Learn AAC guide is just one part of the website. I thought it would be an easy place to jump off for you to have a look at. Basically, it lists a whole lot of the symbol-based AAC articles in one place in different sections. So you can click on any of these articles or information. So say, for example, you're thinking about making AAC always available. You can click, you can see the articles are in some ways a little bit hard to, long to read. That's completely all my fault. I have so much to say so much of the time, but they are trying to give you as much information as you can to help teams set up for different AACs at different phases wherever they're at. But I just want to point out, when you're on the website at any time, there's a little drop down arrow up on the top here, and this allows me to automatically click over, and that's how you get access to all of the articles in the different languages. So Spanish, French, and when you click over to whatever website, you'll see that all of the website is actually translated in that language. So that's kind of cool. And then Netherlands, so the Dutch as well. Amsterdam, AssistiveWare is based in Amsterdam. It's a Dutch company, so it's really nice that we now have materials to support that language as well. So you can see just by clicking through, I have access to all of these and more articles in all languages. Okay, so I'm just go back to my presentation now. So we're kind of pretty proud that we have already a great starting point. We have a heap of materials. So these articles primarily are about supporting communicators and their teams, and they are focused on those who use symbols to communicate. So that's kind of where we started this project and why we wanted to have one place that had comprehensive step-by-step stuff that you would know, that would, you know, have everything in one place. But then we thought about, well, what about all of those people who type to communicate? Our text-based communicators, I suppose we'd call them. And what information do we already have? What information do we need? And that started our part 2 of Learn AAC, which was really when we started. We thought we were going to be writing articles for text-based or for people who type to communicate. And so pretty much the research project started in 2018. I'd like to first of all acknowledge the work of my colleague Erin Sheldon in this project. We collaborated on this. So the first part that we did is we did a literature review, can't even say it properly, but we pretty much, we had a look at how we can use the literature to what it already was telling us about text-based or people who type AAC. So we found some key roles, like we looked at those roles of who helps find AAC, who helps facilitate or mentor AAC. There was a lot when you started looking at the research that identified unmet needs, you know, unmet needs in terms of how we support in medical and care settings, in communities, the behaviour of communication partners. So some of this was already being identified in the research and what kind of mode of AAC they were using. So we started with that. And then we actually, because we didn't really feel that we knew enough, we decided that we would talk to the people that could tell us best. So we did AAC user interviews. We did do some face-to-face ones, but we also made a decision to do what we called asynchronous interviews, and we ran those through private Facebook groups. The concept of asynchronous communication is one that is kind of, but no, not even kind of, is really important for us in the field of AAC. When someone is at a disadvantage because they're not able to speak in a face-to-face, same place, same time conversation, asynchronous forms of communication are super important. It levels the playing field. It means that conversations happen across different spaces and in different times. So whether you, and basically everyone types to communicate in their own time and space. So when we were doing interviews with AAC users, this is the format we chose. So we had the Facebook groups, and people were able to respond and answer in their own time, in their own space, across different time zones even. I really, really want to thank all of the AAC users that came and contributed to the process of the AAC user interviews that we did. Everybody was so generous with their time, and you know, we just learned so much. We did recruit users from all different populations. So we had people with autism, cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, We had acquired progressive, acquired stable, acquired cognitive communication. So we kind of tried to recruit from all different populations so that we had a reflection of the experiences of all different AAC users. Probably our largest group of people were autistic people, and they were really, it was really insightful learning from them, as well as some of these other different populations as well. So the kind of things that we talked about was questions like what's important for your communication, what's working, what's not working in different contexts. We had like the thread about helpful communication partners was long. There was so many things about what was helpful and not helpful in communication partner behaviors. And that whole message, what would an AAC user want to tell the speaking world, their communication partners, their families, the speech pathologists that have supported them, the teachers and educators that have taught them? What would you want them to know? And I guess some of what came after we interviewed, it was kind of a bit of a thought explosion. Boom! Some of the assumptions that we had made were just blown away. And not just that, like just some of what we thought we were doing right was not always going to be right. And I don't know, it was all really very interesting. So some of the key assumptions, that the things that we thought we would know and then were changed after actually speaking to AAC users, we had thought that a lot of people, because we were writing text-based AAC articles, or that's what we were planning for, we thought that people were either someone who used symbols to communicate or someone who typed to communicate, and that in fact most of the AAC users that we interviewed, they didn't experience a simple progression from one to the other, and in fact almost all of the AAC users still relied on symbols sometimes and text at other times. So it was kind of like, you know, well, and it was their choice too, all those things, but you know, there wasn't this progression. There was this kind of universal approach that people could use symbols or text or either or. And that flowed into that idea that the support strategies that we thought were going to be particular to someone who typed to communicate, actually most of our AAC users considered that some of the support strategies that we talked about were universal to them, universal to someone beginning, someone who's just starting to use AAC. So they considered those strategies to be universal, which I thought was really insightful as well. And I guess the last three key points are the things that like struck in my brain a lot, was that fewer than 10% of the people that we interviewed had experienced evidence-based AAC support. So even though you could read in the literature and everybody could tell you what was the right way to get to AAC, fewer than 10% of the people that we interviewed had actually experienced that, which for us as an AAC community should probably worry us somewhat. A lot of them found AAC people, they were maybe not even offered or considered eligible for AAC, and they found it through their own networks, online networks and communities. So there it is. The next one is that the AAC users told us that even though they might have been someone who was considered to be fluent at using AACs and they're good at using AAC, they still regularly go misunderstood or go unheard. And that's probably nothing new to anybody to hear that, but they regularly are misunderstood or go unheard. And that the biggest challenge they consistently face is the behaviour of speaking people. And so this is, I guess, for us as an AAC community, one of our biggest things that I'd love to see us challenge the behaviour of speaking people to support. I mean, that's how we best support our AAC community, by working with communication partners and challenge this. So that's what I would love to see. So what did we do? We used the literature, but we also used this user research that we did. So we wrote a whole lot of new articles with the information. And what we actually discovered is that this information goes across the lifespan, and it's almost regardless of diagnosis as well. So the articles were written for everybody, and including, we made the assumption, of course, our AAC users themselves were going to read them just as much as those people who support them were going to as well. So then part two was rephrased kind of AAC for all, AAC for everyone, because the next articles that Erin and I wrote really can be applied to anybody who uses AAC, whether you use symbols to communicate or you type to communicate or you support somebody that uses either of those things. These articles can help. So let's talk about the new insights, because I think that's really, for me, where what I want to share with you today, some of the stuff that we found and that is reflected in any of our articles. Well, I hope you see these key messages reflected in any of the articles that you might read on our website. So basically, the universal nature of AAC. So it's AAC that's universal. All of us use AAC. It's speech that's only for some. So it's speech that's not inclusive. AAC is literally for everybody. And that, as I mentioned before, asynchronous modes of communication, so things like social media and other things, emails, are far more accessible and inclusive. And especially when comparing that to conversing with speaking people. And that further led into that idea about speaking people need and being able to challenge the behaviours of the communication skills of speaking people when they're interacting with AAC users. Access became a really key thing that a lot of conversation was had about, that we need to think about alternate access for almost all of our AAC users, that just that difference and change in fine motor skills, that fine motor skills might not always equate to being able to access their AAC all of the time, and that considering different alternative access strategies could be or should be really important for all AAC users. So even there was a lot of conversation about an AAC user who might have good fine motor control and can access their symbols, that other times they may or may not be able to, and that could be inconsistent. So thinking about strategies like partner-assisted scanning or eye gaze during moments of crisis, or as the day progresses, or in different contexts like in medical settings and situations. So this was really important, that all AAC users should have access to different ways to access the communication, and just to be prepared and ready for those things. Decision making was another key insight, that it's really up to the AAC user to decide who changes the vocabulary, even down to selecting, changing the voice. It's there to, and actually that's a really interesting one. I had a young man, there's a voice in Preliquote ago, and it's kind of like a Yoda voice. It's called Little Creature, and it's a Yoda voice, and he was determined he was having the Yoda voice. And his mum, so he did, we let him have it. His family came back 2 weeks later and said that voice is driving us crazy. And so, which he thought was hilarious, because, annoy people with your voice, that's great. Getting the reaction I want perfectly. But then we had to have like a negotiation and a rediscussion, and we listened to every voice in the system. And eventually he settled on, well, obviously I'm in Australia, if you couldn't have picked that from my accent already. He didn't like any of the accented Australian voices. Instead, he chose a nice, quite pommy British accent, which sounded, I guess, a little bit like the back controller from Thomas the Tank Engine, and that was his choice. We didn't, and it should always be the AAC user's choice about, if you're going to make changes, add words, change voices. At least ask permission for those things if you're going to change or add words or anything. Also, decision making, it's actually always going to be the AAC user's choice as to when they're going to use their AAC versus other ways to communicate. And that's a really important key concept as well. It's also very important how and when they'll be supported or prompted, and who gets to see their vocabulary, the history in there. And that also a beautiful quote from Darla about choice and communication. And Darla didn't even realize that technically she was doing some partner assisted scanning. She just said, oh, look, I hold up the number of fingers for when I've been given multiple options. you know, to communicate. So she doesn't just use her communication device. She might vocalize or point, give a thumbs up, a thumbs down, and then that's what I said. When given multiple options, holding up the number of fingers for which I prefer. And that's really helpful when I don't have access to my phone or my iPad. So again, that choice, it just kept coming back. Some of the stuff, there was lots of conversation about privacy, not checking, you know, checking vocabulary or message histories. We know that, you know, AAC users, we have to respect their right for privacy for messages, for people to not check on what conversations they may have had or things that they plan to say with their doctor. You know, we can respect that. Even that idea that you're watching the AAC user while they're constructing their message was described to be like you know, something against their privacy as well. And that we had a big conversation about, because of course in the field of AAC we say, oh, we model on their device, you know, we model, and a lot of people said, well, if you are going to model, you always have to ask permission before you touch their device, because you're really trying to teach the user that their AAC is their voice, and you can't take it off them because you just want to model something. You know, you have to ask permission to do that. And a lot of the AAC users said that the ideal situation for modeling is that you use your own device, because we want their AAC to be seen as their voice, not something that you can take off them to give them a message or boss them around or show them something. We loved talking to all the AAC users about all the different ways that they express themselves using AAC. AAC not being just a replacement or a prosthetic for their speech, but also as a visual support used for the person to help them organize, or by the person. They also really were really keen on that idea that social media is also AAC, which it totally is. T-shirts, buttons, badges, texting, messaging are all different forms of AAC. A lot of that, just looking at AAC beyond just that pure purpose of being for communication. Definitely for prompting, strategies, listing, all sorts of things. Also, another key insight was just that ability to personalize your AAC and how important that was. And the personalization comes down to like the voice that you might use, because for a lot of AAC users, is their voice holds so much of their identity. Our voices reflect our backgrounds, culture, our gender, our identities, our age. And so a lot of them talked about having often a dysphoria or a disconnect with the AAC voice that they had. And the last thing that somebody said, the vocabulary of your passions is not core words. And I kind of like that, because at the moment in the area of AAC, yes, we are talking about teaching core words to build language, but core words are the building blocks of language. We kind of need them to put words together, but they're also not the vocabulary that we most want to use to talk about things. So there was a lot of conversation about what are you passionate about? What do you have? And some of the pages they shared of their the most intricate vocabulary of Harry Potter pages with every single possible word for Harry Potter. That's the stuff that they were personalizing into the AAC systems. And I think it's so important. I've got a young man, I probably spent upwards of 2 hours just trying to figure out Doctor Who. I've never watched an episode of Doctor Who in my life, and it's a lot of stuff to get my head around. It took me a really long time to help him personalize Doctor Who words for his AAC. But man, that's his favorite page. If you want to have to start a conversation with him, that's the one, because that's the vocabulary of his passions. So making sure that we're taking that time to really personalize and make an AAC system reflect the words and their identity. That's the most important thing we can do. Okay, so those were some of our insights. And I just wanted to point out that, like, through all of this process, there was a whole lot of stuff that we decided that we needed to write about, and they came across in our articles. And not just that we want to put them into an article online for somebody to read, but that us as AssistiveWare, this is the stuff that we want to be engaging in conversations about in the AAC community. So here's some of them. Basically, that whole challenging the behavior of our communication partners is something that I think is really important for us at AssistiveWare. We really, really want to build people's communication partner skills. We want the people that are interacting with the AAC users to be person-centered and respectful, and to really, really understand how important their role is as a communication partner. And so, yes, there's a few articles in and around on this concept. And that whole idea that for every single AAC user, they need to be supported in a way that's specific and personal to them. And actually, we ended up making a whole checklist. So I can share the specific link to that article. There's a checklist that you can go through with your AAC user and identify the ways that they want to be supported best. It's such a cool process to go through. And even if you have an emergent communicator, you could look at this in terms of looking at what's working and not working. So don't think about these sitting down and doing a checklist with an AAC user only being for those people who type to communicate. Even our emergent learners, this is stuff that we need to consider. And I guess the key things about it is that good communication partners, we learned this time and time again, they're respectful and patient. They wait, and they really ask about how they can support the AAC user better. They just ask, they don't just assume. And one of our favourite quotes from one of our AAC users was about his favourite communication partner, and it's his partner. He's very understanding. I never feel judged. If I'm using speech and begin to struggle, he'll prompt me to get my iPad out. I often forget. He waits for me to type or find symbols in Proloquo to go. He's completely understanding of how I may switch backwards and forward between AAC and verbal speech. It doesn't faze him. It doesn't make him value one form of communication more than another, which I think that's like my favorite bit. Doesn't make him value one form of communication more than another. He values me communicating, however that may be. He listens. So again, this just really is to the heart of what every single communication partner needs to do, in my opinion. Another thing that we really, really can talk about more, and really, for me, like I'm a speech pathologist, and so quite often I'm doing therapy in my room with a family, and they come and see me, and you know, traditional speech therapy would be, oh, I'm going to show you how to use your AAC, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. But now that we have social media, my whole slant changes, because I think if at the end of the day that some of these young people I'm supporting who might have been little but are now growing up and they're young adults, if they can use Instagram to connect with the world around them, or Facebook, or any of those things, that is going to be really powerful for them. So I start them even really young, taking photos and writing captions about it, which is kind of what Instagram is. But even before you're on Instagram or thinking about social media, having kids sharing their story using their photos and their words is really powerful. So in the early days, I might use an app like Pictello that allows us to put in a photo and write some text, or copy in some text from our AAC. But this is all building up that skills of how we can use social media in AAC. And because I think that long term, if AAC users have access to different social media platforms, it really opens possibilities, and it actually can enhance the communication and relationships with the people around them. One of my young friends, he's now 17, I convinced he and his family to create an Instagram account before they went on their trip to Europe. It was brilliant. He shared photos of himself all over Europe. Sometimes he might have only typed 1 or 2 words because his literacy skills are still emergent, but it was so cool, and people could reply with an emoji. It was really powerful way for him to communicate, and now he's home, he still uses Instagram all the time. This is one of my favorite quotes from when we talked about social media, because it talks about how people the judgments people make. So social media assists communication partners and non-disabled peers to understand capacity. When people meet me in person, they often use 2-word sentences, which I think most AAC users would say that's happened to them. But those who have interacted with me on social media will treat me as the educated, insightful person that I am. Thank you, Johanna, for saying that. So I think that's really important, that people then presume that competence or understand capacity and then treat as she should be. Okay, another really important topic, again, there's not much information about it in our AAC community, is about part-time AAC users. And that whole idea that if a person chooses to use AAC, they should and they can if it improves their communication. There was lots of conversations, particularly with our autistic AAC users who came to AAC use actually as adults. They came in a little bit later to the foray and of AAC and the AAC community, because for their entire student lives in schools, people forced them to communicate, particularly if they had shown evidence of some verbal communication. Once people had the idea that they could talk, then they were always use your words and forced to talk. And then as they found AAC users, they realized how much more they could say with AAC than what their mouth ever was able to. So there was a few quotes from the AAC users in that, you know, that not all AAC users have no verbal speech. Some of them have voluntary verbal speech or involuntary verbal speech. Some of them have both. I love Alyssa Hillary's work. The goal should not be verbal speech, but good communication. Actually, Alyssa has written has got a published article in the area of part-time AAC, and if anybody's interested in that, I can send you the link to that. I'm going to share my email address at the end, so if there's anything that's piqued your interest and I've mentioned something you want a particular link to, then please email me. I can get back to you if we don't answer it at the end. The next quote was, understand that sometimes I'm able to use my voice and sometimes I have to use AAC. It's their choice. That's the nature of a part-time AAC use. Another really, and if you know Erin Sheldon well or Erin Sheldon's work, you'll realize about how supported decision making is to her. And it's about real choice and real control. That if quite often, some people who use AAC, or when a person can't speak, their ability to make their own decisions for what's happening in their life and their world can be really reduced. So we've written a couple of articles that really speak to this, about no matter what stage of AAC or communication, how much you talk or don't talk or use AAC or not, how you can really be supported to make your own decisions for real choice and control. Amazing articles, and something that, again, is so important for us as a community to talk about. And also very near and dear to Erin's heart is talking about the safety and security of people who use AAC. And so again, we have a whole article that talks about how you might support and reduce the vulnerability for non-speaking people. So all really important topics. So I'm just going to finish now my presentation just with that idea about thought change. For us as an AAC community, you know, we're really about driving change in AAC. Well, at AssistiveWare we particularly are, and I know that organisations like Isaac are definitely on the same thought train as us, and why it's such an honour and privilege to be able to share some of our thoughts with you guys today. So when we think about thought change in AAC, to me, it's like a wave, which I'm really I love that my designer put waves on my slides. It's made me very, very happy, because, you know, things that are pretty are also important to Amanda. But I like that there's this wave coming through, because I'd love us to start this big thought wave where we do things differently and we make change and, you know, remove the barriers for people that use AAC. So first of all, here's the first thought change. Let's broaden our idea as to who might be eligible and benefit from AAC. So let's broaden that to recognise that even those that speak AAC can benefit from AAC. So I'm lucky enough, I work in a heap of schools. They are special schools, so not inclusion, but in special schools here in Queensland, Australia. And we've done like these whole school approaches to AAC, where every teacher is encouraged to embed AAC practice in their teaching. And you know what? Those kids that need AAC, that have limited or not as much speech benefit, but even those kids with some speech are really developing language and better communication from having AAC embedded around them. So let's broaden our idea as to who we think might be eligible and who can benefit from AAC. this is one for the speech pathologists out there, we need to focus less on the actual motor task of speech. I mean, it doesn't mean that we ever don't work on it because we're speech pathologists, but I'd love us to be called communication pathologists or something. I'm being silly, but really, if we think about it, it should be more about the actual communication, however it looks, whether there's speech or AAC or whatever way, gestures, body language, all of those multimodal communication things. We should be really focusing on communication, however it looks. And respecting the person, the AAC users, that it's always their decision when, how, and to whom they wish to communicate. And any AAC user will tell you that it's about efficiency. I'm going to use the way that's the most efficient to get my message across. And it's also about, you know, who I'm with and how they'll react, but it's always respecting that it's their choice. And a big thing, and if you hadn't kind of already got on or caught on to that idea through other things I'd said, we have to shift the work of accommodating AAC and removing the barriers to the communication partners. That's our job. And the research and the AAC user interviews and everything we know shows us that AAC users quite often are not in a position of power almost to be able to challenge the behaviours of communication partners. They are more likely to stop using their AAC than they are to challenge them. So this is really important for us as an AAC community to get on that wave where we're looking at the behaviour of communication partners and we're shifting it, we're making it their work to remove the barriers to make communication successful and to happen. And really, it comes down to teaching those communication partners to be good listeners. Listen to not only the words that they're saying, but also what people's bodies and faces are saying. And just ask questions. Don't make assumptions. Ask and observe. And don't assume that you know what is best or the best communication. I also would love in the AAC community where we can really look at AAC users as role models and mentors. So many of our emergent learner AAC users don't ever get to see someone using AAC like they are trying to do. So we have to really be active in that, and which is why, of course, the AAC conferences is always one of your favorite places to go, because you actually see AAC users there and, you know, they can fill into those roles as role models and mentors. This is so important for us to listen and have our emergent AAC users have the opportunity to be mentored by an AAC user. And lastly, we want to presume that all AAC users, regardless of if they use those symbols or they type or both or anything, that we all need the same toolkit of strategies to be heard. So learn AAC. Now, everything that I've talked about, you're going to find everything in one place, which of course is my greatest achievement, not mine, my team, my AssistiveWare, and it's AAC for everyone, and it's in 4 languages. So I've just flipped over my screen. We're actually doing, if you go to Learn AAC now, it won't quite look like this. We have some very clever web people that are redesigning it, so it's going to look nice like this. It'll be much easier for you to find anything. And of course, any article that you might find along the way, lifelong AAC, here's supported decision-making stuff, the planning for AAC medical settings. Any article you'll be able to click the drop-down menu for and access in 4 languages as well, which is super cool. So AAC for everyone, everything in one place and in 4 languages. That's, to me, pretty cool. So our website is AssistiveWare.com, and we'd love to see you get along there. As I said, the page that I just showed you is in a bit of development at the moment, so it'll Learn AAC section will look slightly different, but you'll still hopefully find some of the articles. Here's my email address though, so anybody that hasn't had a chance or can't find an article or something that I've talked about, I'm happy to email them the links. So I think that I am pretty much finished almost everything I want to say. Hopefully there's some questions, and we've still got about 10 minutes together that we can answer those. Thanks, everyone.
Amanda, thank you very much. You're a fabulous presenter. So again, we appreciate you being here today and sharing all this with you, sharing all this with us, I should say. I am, if you just bear with me for one moment, everyone, I'm just going to put my screen up on assuming, whoops. Sorry, bear with me for 1 minute. Now I'm having problems with sharing my screen. All right, well, I'm not going to waste any more time on that. I'm just going to, while we're waiting for a few questions to come in, and I see some questions are coming in now, Amanda. I was personally struck by one of the things that you mentioned, which was the fact that the behavior of speaking people is oftentimes one of the biggest obstacles that people who use AAC have to deal with. And I was so taken by that because I've seen it in action at in the run-up to organizing our conferences, and which is why one of the big reasons why prior to every conference, Aac actually does communication access training with the local businesses and the conference venues in advance of us running a conference, so that we can bring that learning and that sense of putting people's minds into broadening their minds into understanding the needs of the stakeholder group. So I was really struck by when you said that. So thank you very much for that.
And I think, yeah, I think that, like, from a conference perspective and a business perspective, building communication access, with businesses and partners is fantastic. I just think we need to be having the conversation earlier as well, like in school, in schools and in homes. It's something that, regardless of where someone is in the AAC journey, how old they are, or how long they've been using AAC, it consistently appears to be one of the biggest barriers. So there's a lot of work, and I love the communication accessibility and communication access stuff. That I know there's lots of great work happening in Canada, and even here in Australia we've got an organisation called Scope that is doing communication access training for businesses, and I just think that's really important. And we have got a whole article written about that too in Learn AAC about communication access. So yeah.
Great, thank you. So yes, we do have some questions coming in. So one of the first questions is, are your learners clients SID? And I'm assuming you're aware of the acronym SID. They indicated here severe intellectual disability.
So, well, me personally, as a speech pathologist, as Franklin mentioned, I work with a broad mix as a speech pathologist. So yes, I've worked with lots of young people, well, all people that also have intellectual disability. But I think probably your question was in relation to whether the people that we interviewed had intellectual disabilities. We had some families participated where some of the questions were asked to, rather than the AAC user, but to the AAC supporter. So they're a partner or a caregiver, and we asked the same questions. And as I said, I think that if we think that the things that I'm talking about only apply to people that don't have intellectual disability, I think that's kind of not really the right solution either. Everything that I've spoken about applies to all AAC users, but obviously how we make it accessible. For example, one of the examples I gave was about an AAC user having control over how they like to be supported best. And I mentioned that I have a checklist. And so the idea would be you would sit down with the AAC user and you could run through the checklist, and they could say, oh, I like it when people don't look over my shoulder when I'm writing a message, or that they wait for 10 seconds, or, some AAC users you will be able to have that interaction with. What I think is important, that even if you're working with someone that perhaps has a severe intellectual disability, it doesn't mean that you couldn't do that checklist with them and their support team. It's just that you would look at it different. You would fill out the checklist about what's working and what doesn't working, because you're going to observe and watch their behaviors and how they respond or react to certain things. So you might look at the checklist that says something like where the AAC user most wants the person to stand or to sit when they're interacting, across, behind, beside. And whilst the AAC user with an intellectual disability might not be able to say directly, they can still, probably if you observe them and take the time to watch what their body is saying, there probably are preferences that are occurring there if we take that time to sit and observe. And that's stuff that we do when we're problem solving what's working and what's not working in the environment and with communication partners. So yes, there are different things that we have to do when we have severe intellectual disability, but we also, again, come back to that we shouldn't be making assumptions about what can and can't be done. All people have that, it is just in the way that we might interact with the team and observe and make changes to it. I hope I answered the question.
All right.
Sorry, long-winded.
Fabulous. If the person who asked that question has a follow-up, I'm sure they'll type it in. So great, thank you. We've had a couple of people indicating a couple of questions on how to get the slides for this evening's presentation. So there are actually two ways. The slides are available from the handouts section of the GoToWebinar customer user interface. So you just need to click the arrow next to handouts, and it should open that drop down, which is hyperlinked, which allows you to open it and download it. If for whatever reason that does not work for you, then the same slides have been posted on the Aac website. Just go to our homepage, and at the top, click on webinars, and then under this webinar, which will be near the top of that page, you'll see the ability to download that same PDF file. So hopefully that will help address those issues. So while we have, I think we have about 3 minutes left. If someone else has any additional questions, now's the time to type them in. I am going to take a minute and just, since Amanda, thank you for opening the door with me about mentioning the conference. Aac, as probably everyone is aware, has recently announced a postponement of Conference 2020. And I know I've been repeating myself, so at the risk of repeating myself one more time, I'm just going to let everyone know that the prime motivating factor for the postponement, clearly the current global pandemic situation is affecting everyone's daily life. But we are also extremely sensitive to all our stakeholder groups, and that includes, of course, people who are at higher risk of complications if they contract COVID-19. So we want to do everything we could as an organization to ensure the safety, security, and well-being of everyone. So Conference 2020 is postponed, not canceled, and it will be occurring July 31st through August 5th of 2021. And we have held some really positive attendee webinar sessions like this, explaining our thinking to everyone. We're going into some positive sponsor exhibitor webinar sessions tomorrow for the same. So stay tuned. We're going to be posting all of the most of current information on the Conference 2020 website. So we have some more questions coming in. Amanda, if you're up for a couple more minutes.
Sure, no problems.
Good. Okay, so one question. I work with school-age children, and if I ask their permission to use their device, they may say no. Any thoughts?
Yes, they may say no. So in those instances, if you can't have your own AAC to model, usually I go to, especially in schools, I use printouts, paper-based versions of the AAC. So you know, having I've got the doing a screen capture of their AAC, their homepage, for example, and then printing that out to use is pretty much my stock standard. And in fact, in most of my schools, I make the teachers do those and contact and laminate them onto the desks so that they're kind of always on hand. If you're not, or you're wearing them, you always have them. So you're right, somebody may, but it is their choice. They're allowed to say no, or they're allowed to say sometimes or maybe. But it came through from our adult AAC users, just important how it was to respect that choice, that if we took AAC off them and took it away, which was effectively their voice, that the AAC user didn't feel that they had a control over or an ownership for their AAC device. So I think it's important to think about it. So I would go print out low-tech ones. If you don't have your own AAC to model on, then yeah, go with the paper ones.
Fabulous. Thank you, Amanda. I think we have time for one last question, and this one is tips for encouraging a 5-year-old boy to use AAC. He has zero interest, and we are brand new to this.
Oh, you are very much at the start of your journey. If I can suggest to you, because it's, you know, it's how long is it, when you're starting out, the main thing is really about trying to use the AAC to meet what he is interested in, irrespective of the AAC. So the 3 things I always say to beginners, kids need something to talk with. So you now have his AAC to help him talk with. They need somebody to talk to, so presumably you, and if not you, a sibling or a friend or someone in the environment, and something to talk about. So what things do you think your child wants to talk about? And if they want to talk about Doctor Who, like I said, or PJ Masks, or a game, or YouTube, or whatever it is, you meet them at their interest level, and without putting any pressure on them to touch or push the AAC, you start pushing buttons on the AAC, which is that concept of modeling that we talk about. You show them how communication can look to talk about things that are interesting to them. I'm also really open. If you wanted to send me an email, I can send you to some nice groups, some beginning videos that you might like to watch. I've been making some videos recently that shows me using AAC for some fun games. So I'm happy if you email me, I can send you some specific things to help you get started, because you're just really starting out. Everything is really new, and I probably assume it's very overwhelming at this stage. So I'd love to just send you and point you in a few directions if I can.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And again, so thank you very much, everyone. It is a couple of minutes past 8, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time, including yours as well, Amanda. So thank you very much for being with us here this evening. As I mentioned, please do check our website, www.isaac-online.org, and click at the top for the Conference 2020 site, and you'll see all of our latest information posted there. We are working hard at making Conference 2020 a success, and as I said, we've had to freeze things a little bit, but only temporarily. So again, I always have to remind myself, Amanda, notwithstanding the technical glitches, you're there in Brisbane, Australia. I'm here in Toronto, Canada. We've had people on the line this evening throughout Europe, North America, Central and South America. This really is a global event. And I will thank you once again, Amanda, and I will thank everyone for their time this evening. Please do stay safe and well and healthy. And please, everyone, listen to your governmental agencies regarding health and safety. And if you need to stay indoors, please do so and keep well. And Isaac looks forward to making many more opportunities like this available over the coming weeks and months. So thank you and good night, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.